Within the last few days, there was an example where Chancellor Scholz was mentioned for calling Putin a warmonger.
That was a change of Scholz's narrative when it comes to war. He's not an emotional politic, and maybe that was the first time when he called the events and what is happening the way it really is.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Furnival. You are watching or listening to an OSW interview. Today I'll be talking to Lydia Guibadwa, an expert from OSW's Germany and Northern Europe department. We'll be discussing the Eastern policy of the leading party in Germany's ruling coalition and how this policy is evolving due to Russia's war in Ukraine. So today we're going to discuss the Eastern policy of contemporary Germany, but it might be worth starting off with a little introduction to the Ostpolitik, which began with Chancellor Willy Brandt in 1969-1970. Could you add a little more detail, please?
Yeah, so Ostpolitik is considered as one of the greatest successes of the young German Republic, and it has become a pillar, one of the pillars of the modern German foreign policy. But one should remember that its primary goal was to bring forward the reunification of two German states. But later on, it served to build...
Later on, after reunification.
Exactly, thank you. After the reunification, it was used as a main pillar of German government's policy towards Eastern Europe. One should remember that although at the very beginning this rule was based on a kind of a motto, change through rapprochement. Later on, it evolved into change through trade, which caused problems that we face nowadays when it comes to German politics towards Eastern Europe.
So mutual dependency.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the issues.
Okay, so these mutual dependencies, which were built up through trade, but the initial idea was to change Eastern Europe through rapprochement.
Exactly, for creating cultural and social ties. German government wanted to bring closer countries that belonged to hostile ideological bloc. And in the back of their heads, Germans also thought that through this attitude, somehow with the time, they could also influence the local societies to become more democratic. Although, as I mentioned before, the primary goal was the reunification.
So this idea of change through rapprochement or change through trade, in the East they were cooperating in this willingly. So they could not simply have been willing victims of this. Obviously, they thought they could have some influence and, of course, earn some money as well. So my question is, did Germany change? Did Germany become less democratic because of this Eastern policy?
I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that the idea of change through rapprochement, which later on evolved into change through trade, was a very useful element of German soft power, and it was a good excuse to maintain close economic and also political ties with countries which do not share the same democratic values as the West. Although the close ties between Germany and, for example, Russia somehow influenced German political scene in a sense that, for example, after 24 February, we can observe
2022.
Exactly. We can observe a lot of publications about close political ties between Russia and Germany in the political sphere. And I mean, Gerhard Schroeder is the top example of those ties, and how deep they go into the German political scene.
This is exactly what I wanted to turn to. There have been many people saying that Germany is somehow responsible for the war in Ukraine, mainly examples like the Nord Stream pipeline. And this was precisely a project during Gerhard Schroeder's time. And Gerhard Schroeder came from the Social Democrat Party in Germany, and the Social Democrats are in power again. Do they have something on their conscience, the Social Democrats, regarding Ukraine?
Okay, I wouldn't go that far in the assessment that Germany is somehow responsible for the war in Ukraine. It's Russia who invaded Ukraine, and that was a Putin decision to attack the sovereign state. But definitely, SPD gave a kind of a strategic framework for German way of thinking about Russia. Although one has to say that this kind of thinking was continued by Christian Democrats, and until 24th of February, it wasn't that much questioned by the politicians, although experts were very much skeptical towards continuation of the course in German politics, but that's a different story, and a part of German political scene were also very reluctant to keep going with that kind of thinking. For example, Greens were very outspoken about their worries about the consequences of maintaining the Ostpolitik the way that was.
When did their concerns begin? Was this before the full-scale invasion from Russia? Or?
Yeah, but we could observe that during the campaign before the Bundestag elections. The Greens were very outspoken when it comes to the consequences of Nord Stream 2, of let's say not considering the worries of Central and Eastern European countries about this project, and also about the German dependency on the import of Russian energy resources, and how that might work out if the crisis occurs. And before the 24th February 2022, we could observe how Russia can use its energetic upper hand when it comes to countries dependent on the import of energetic resources from Russia. For example, it was visible in Romania or Bulgaria.
Okay, so you spoke about the German concerns and the mistakes they made leading up to the full-scale invasion in February last year. But immediately after the invasion, the German response has been described as rather disappointing. The culmination seemed to be that Frank-Walter Steinmeier wanted to take a visit to Ukraine along with the leaders of Poland and the Baltic states. And he was informed he would not be welcome in Kyiv. Why did it take so long for Germany to react when the crisis did begin?
I guess it was a kind of a shock for political elites, and somehow political elite had to explain that to society, how to think anew about relations with Russia, and how to react, how to act in times of the biggest security crisis after the Second World War in Europe. Germany had to come to terms with the reality, and the reality is that the relations with Putin, the way they were before the 24th of February, could no longer be continued, and you have to redefine one of the pillars of your foreign policy, namely Ostpolitik. And here he also touches upon the German thinking of Russia, and that wasn't created in 1960s. It was rooted way before that. I mean, we have to go back to 18th, 19th century to Russian-Prussian relations, how they evolved, a kind of thinking about Russia, German thinking about Russia, which is a mixture of romanticism and fear of the big empire, which is always hungry in terms of land and is always ready to attack. And after to attack other sovereign countries. Mm-hmm. And after the Second World War, there was also thinking about Russia. That's the thinking, the constant fear during the Cold War, that Germany is placed on the border between two blocks, and there's also always a risk of the Third World War, and the first victim of the new conflict would be Germany. The other thing was a kind of a feeling of gratitude towards Russia for allowing the reunification of Germany. We should consider like the reaction, the German reaction to Gorbachev's death. He's considered as one of the people who put foundations to under the reunified Germany.
Which explains why he's so controversial in Russia.
Yeah. So that somehow explains the shock Germany faced after the 24th February, and the reason why they weren't prepared for action. Actually, it was very interesting to observe German reaction, the evolution of German stance toward Russia, toward Ukraine during this after-war year. We could observe like some red lines which was moved, and some rules to which Scholz's government sticks until today. Mm-hmm. I would say that one thing is always acting in cooperation with your allies, and among these allies, the most important one is the United States. That was visible during the Leopard's debate. So.
The tanks, the German tanks.
Exactly. So Germany agreed to deliver Leopards to Ukraine and gave a green light for other countries who own Leopards to re-export them to Ukraine only after the
because
US.
Germany can effectively block the re-export.
Yeah, because as a producer, they have to give a green light to any other countries which would like to sell the thanks to other partner, and not until the US gave green light when it comes to the delivery of Abrams. They refused to deliver Leopards to Ukraine. You mentioned Steinmeier not going to Ukraine with Baltic states presidents, but it also reminds me of the change into Ukrainian attitude toward Germany. I mean, like Zelensky, last month Zelensky was in Berlin, and I guess it's...
Could I step back just one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
1 year. Because you mentioned the Greens were much more realistic about the threat from Russia, and the Greens are in the coalition government, and the foreign minister is from the Greens, and her relations with Ukraine were much more friendly, and she was the first one to make a visit to Ukraine. Was this when the door was opened, or did the entire coalition have to somehow reset their thinking regarding Ukraine?
Okay, it's quite complicated when we talk about like foreign policy right now, because it's pretty obvious that there are some tensions and conflicts between the chancellery and the foreign office. So one have to remember that
there are still some tensions.
Yeah, of course. For example, one's considering the national security strategy or strategy towards China, but those are the subjects for the different discussion. So when we talk about Ukraine, first of all, like the leading competences in foreign policy are within the chancellery, not the foreign office. So the person who takes decisions, the most important ones, considering foreign policy, is Chancellor Scholz. Nevertheless, it's not that Baerbock has no say in the decisions considering the foreign office, and I guess that her involvement and Minister of Economy Habeck, who is Vice Chancellor, their influence somehow prompted Scholz or made him uncomfortable to prolong, to wait longer with his decision to deliver Leopards. For example, like Habeck's declaration that we shouldn't refuse Ukraine the weapons was also an element of political game between the Chancellery and the Greens. Whereas Chancellor have to also remember that somehow he has to appease his own political background, which is SPD, which is much more skeptical towards foreign office and its strict course when it comes to Russia. For example, those hardcore SPD members like Rolf Mützenich, who is the chief of SPD's group in Bundestag, they support diplomatic tools rather than military ones.
Still talking to Russia, in other words.
Yeah, because the philosophy, they follow the philosophy of dialogue, which was the main rule of German Ostpolitics for 4 years. So if you read the SPD's declaration documents considering foreign policy, or in this case, Ostpolitik, SPD's group in Bundestag, is pretty clear that they would like to renew dialogue with Russia, but after Russia withdrew its troops from Ukraine and stops the invasion. But still, like dialogue is one of the key elements of this policy.
Okay, so we should get back to the current situation. You were about to mention Zelensky's recent visit to Berlin, and things have improved.
Yeah, I would say that that is an example of how relations between Berlin and Kyiv evolved during this year. Because it was pretty obvious that they were tense at the beginning. We had former Ukrainian ambassador in Berlin who was pretty outspoken when it came to Kyiv's dissatisfaction with Germany's action or inaction during the previous months. The current ambassador is more, I would say, diplomatic when it comes to his comments considering Germany's policy towards Ukraine, their engagement in supporting Ukraine in this war, and obviously Zelensky's price for Germany's support, both military, humanitarian, financial, etc., was for me was the pinnacle of this change. I guess that Ukraine realized that Germany has the financial capacity and the political capacity to influence to both support Ukraine in long term and get engaged into rebuilding Ukraine, and secondly, to put their weight into possible peace negotiations. So I guess that Kyiv would rather be on good terms with Berlin rather than the worse ones. And then again, like for Germany, underlying the ongoing support for Ukraine and those 2.7 billion euro fund for military support for Ukraine is the argument that they are a reliable partner, that they can help Ukraine in the long term. Especially that we have the American presidential elections upcoming, and there is a slight apprehension when it comes to their outcomes, and the new administration's Republicans' attitude towards the support for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. In this way, Germany presents itself as the most reliable, the most capable partner of Ukraine in this war, and as one of the key actors when it comes to Ukrainians' ambitions of joining EU or NATO.
Which is a very interesting subject, which needs to be discussed when the time comes. One sign I would like to point out is that the Germans were very, very reserved February of last year. But within the last few days, there was an example where Chancellor Scholz was praised, mentioned for calling Putin a warmonger. Is this the new line of the German government, to be very hawkish on Russia?
I would say that was a change of Scholz's narrative when it comes to war, because he's not an emotional politic. He refrains from raising his voice, from using wording like you mentioned, and that kind of an outburst is unusual for him. And maybe that was a very unique, unusual moment when he really expressed what he thinks about the war and Putin's role in it. And maybe that was the first time when he called the events and what is happening the way it really is.
So one thing for sure, Germany's Eastern policy is changing.
Yes, it is, and we are observing how is it changing.
Okay, and we shall continue to, and if it changes very dramatically, I'm sure you will come back and give us all the details.
You can count on me.
Thank you very much, Lydia.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you for watching this OSW interview. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe so you will keep up to date with our content.